I still remember the smell of roasted chicken and garlic, the warmth of home-cooked meals, the sound of silverware clinking against plates. I remember laughter, voices overlapping, jokes exchanged, the illusion of family. But what I remember most is the moment that shattered it all. Michael stood up, cleared his throat, and then, without hesitation, he said it. "You can't stay here anymore, Mum. No rent, no home." The words cut through me like a blade, slicing through decades of love, sacrifice, and silent endurance. Gasps echoed around the table. My spoon clattered onto my plate. He didn't even flinch, not a hint of regret, not a second thought. I looked around, at his wife, his children, our extended family. No one spoke, no one defended me. It was then I realized I had been erased, forgotten, abandoned, cast aside like an unwanted relic in my son's perfect, polished life. But what he didn't realize, what none of them expected, was that I wasn't done yet. And by the next day, I held the keys to my own home. Drop your city below. We want to see how far this story has reached. I rolled my last suitcase over their designer rug, brushed cinnamon flour from my sleeves, and told Michael that the house smelled better than the real estate brochure that first lured him into debt. He laughed, clapped me on the shoulder, and promised unlimited stay, no strings. Susan hovered behind him, arms crossed, counting how long the hug lasted. I thanked them both, settled into the guest room, and placed a framed photo of 4-year-old Michael, gap-toothed, triumphant after his first bike ride, on the nightstand as a reminder of the boy who once begged me for one more bedtime story. The honeymoon ended with the electric bill. Michael strode into the kitchen at dawn, phone held high, and announced that $47 extra proved someone had left space heaters on all night. I owned the only heater. I admitted it, pledged to cover the difference, and reached for my checkbook before the coffee even finished brewing. Susan suggested an app that tracked who drained what, and I smiled as though the idea did not sting. I wrote the check, tucked the carbon copy into my diary, and hoped that generosity might be contagious. Every morning afterward, Michael left neon envelopes on my bedroom door. Payment reminder glared at me in traffic cone orange before my eyes found the first cup of tea. Susan dusted around them as if they were seasonal decor. When I peeled one down, the sticky strip took a curl of paint with it. That gouge in the eggshell finish felt like a bruise nobody else could see. Saturday brought the grocery cart duel. We moved through the produce aisle, Michael tapping totals into his phone. I reached for fresh raspberries, explaining that antioxidants soothed my arthritis. He replaced them with frozen bricks, telling me that fiscal responsibility also reduced inflammation. Susan nodded, rolled the cart forward, and posted a story about minimalist shopping. I let the berries thaw into slush in my thoughts, tasting regret hours before dinner. The cardiology appointment struck next. Copay $380. Social security check delayed by a holiday. My savings thin after the divorce. I asked Michael for a short loan, voice lowered so Mrs. Callahan from next door could not overhear our business. Michael, still in his CrossFit hoodie, scrolled his tablet and answered that they were not a charity. I reminded him that I once sold my wedding ring to keep him in summer camp. He said that was decades ago. I swallowed the memory with lukewarm decaf, stared at the ring-shaped dent still visible on my finger, and felt decades collapse into one sharp second of shame. He emailed a formal lease that night. Rent $1,200 due on the 1st, utilities separate, late fee $50 per day. I stared at the PDF while the house darkened, signed nothing, pressed 2 ibuprofen against my tongue, and listened to the refrigerator hum like distant thunder. Thanksgiving arrived coated in maple glaze and brittle civility. Michael raised a toast to family and financial responsibility, while relatives cheered. I lifted my glass and added a line about kindness that does not issue invoices. Forks paused. The air thinned. Someone coughed. Later, Michael opened his laptop and projected pie charts of household expenses onto the smart TV. The late penalty matrix received polite applause. I watched the colors swirl, felt my heartbeat echo the spinning pinwheel of a frozen screen, and understood that humiliation could masquerade as entertainment if the lighting was festive enough. December snow softened the cul-de-sac, but tension sharpened indoors. I placed my mother's glass snow globe on the mantel, hoping its tiny village might restore warmth. Michael examined it, declared it clutter, and tried to hand it back. I insisted it stayed. Susan mentioned staging rules for potential buyers and claimed tchotchkes lowered perceived value. Michael pivoted to carry it toward the basement. I reached. The globe slipped, shattered on the hardwood, and glycerin snow spread across the planks like a silent blizzard. I knelt, gathered shards, and remembered kneeling beside Michael's train set decades earlier, gluing wheels he had snapped in frustration. A nor'easter iced the driveway. My heart medication ran out. The pharmacy closed early. I felt the irregular thump that always preceded trouble and asked Michael for a ride to the hospital. He paced, phone at his ear, sealing a property deal, and muttered that ambulances existed for a reason. I insisted the copay for emergency transport was obscene. He raised one finger for silence, concluded his call, and replied that if I could not afford copays, perhaps it was time to rethink my living arrangement. Pain radiated down my arm, not severe enough for collapse, but bright enough to sear the last thread tethering me to his mercy. I drove myself in my aging Buick, snowblind, windshield wipers slapping time like a metronome. After an EKG and stern lecture from the night doctor, I returned at dawn to find a new neon note taped across my doorframe. Delinquent, second notice. Christmas Eve humiliation sealed the verdict. Guests filled the living room, fireplace crackling, Susan live-streaming holiday cheer. I offered antique angel ornaments, hand-painted by my grandmother. Michael announced to the crowd that I had scavenged landfill relics for rent money. Laughter ricocheted off vaulted ceilings. I tasted eggnog and bile indistinguishable. My pulse stuttered, yet my spine straightened. That night, I stood on the porch beneath fairy lights, snow landing on my slippers, and recognized the hush before a storm I would summon myself. New Year's Eve fireworks bloomed outside, while I sat alone in the den, balancing my pill organizer and scanning bank alerts. Shared household fees drained every last dollar. Wi-Fi amortization, climate control premium, parental depreciation. Midnight cheering erupted upstairs. I confronted Michael in the kitchen. He poured champagne, shrugged, and explained that economics favored contributors. I, voice flat, told him he was stripping me of dignity. He leaned in, breath laced with brute, and promised that without rent there would be no shelter. I stared at the boy I once carried on my hip and saw only a landlord tightening the screws. At 7 minutes past midnight, I closed my bedroom door, opened the seeded jewelry box Dad carved in '62, and retrieved 2 tiny things. The fire safe key, holding every deed from my late parents, and the smart lock override token still registered. To me, because I had co-signed Michael's mortgage. I pressed cold metal into my palm until crescents carved my skin, packed a suitcase, and wrote "paid in full" across the neon notice before taping it to his master suite door. I walked into the freezing street without a coat, yet felt warmer than I had in months. Storm clouds rolled above the cul-de-sac, but storms mean nothing to a woman who finally remembers she commands the keys. Michael chose my 60th birthday as the stage for his grand performance. The invitation described a celebration of the woman who taught us generosity, but the guest list read like a cul-de-sac census. Neighbors I barely knew, co-workers of his who treated the barbecue like a networking event, and Susan's Instagram circle, angling for aesthetic backyard photos. I spent the morning glazing ribs, hoping the meat might persuade love where words had failed. By 4 o'clock, fairy lights twinkled above rented cocktail tables, and a Bluetooth speaker pulsed with curated nostalgia, songs from my youth stripped of warmth by algorithmic remix. I refilled platters, smiling until my cheeks trembled. Michael circulated in a craft beer haze, greeting every new arrival as evidence of his magnanimity. Susan livestreamed the spread, adding hashtags about family values. At 6, the air smelled of smoke and cilantro. Michael clinked his IPA against a serving fork, calling for attention. Conversations thinned to a hush, fireworks of phone cameras popped. He announced, voice pitched for irony, that his dear mother was 60 and still a rent-free resident of Casa Callahan. He said this proved his heart was 3 sizes larger than the mortgage. Laughter scattered like gravel across concrete. Coleslaw caught in my throat. I claimed, steady as I could, that I covered utilities and groceries. Michael wagged the fork, correcting me that cable remained in his name. Therefore, my balance sheet was still red. Guest chuckled again, louder now that he had framed the joke as a finance lesson. Heat from the grill licked my calves. My own skin felt raw. I noticed several neighbors glancing sideways, unsure whether to laugh or intervene. Susan sipped rosé and recorded it all, murmuring that transparency built stronger communities. I gathered rib bones, worked polishing cloth over imaginary stains, anything to occupy hands that wanted to tremble. Michael wheeled out a sheet cake frosted in champagne gold. Pay up or pack up appeared in piped letters where happy birthday should have been. Gasps punctured the evening fog. My gut twisted, but before humiliation could silence me, I steadied my voice. I told the crowd that rent would never buy respect, and that a child who weaponized shelter against his own mother had forgotten the meaning of home. I finished by saying generosity measured itself when no one was watching, not when the neighbors had their phones up. A hush spread wider than the yard. Someone on Susan's live stream typed a shocked emoji. For one heartbeat, Michael looked rattled. Then he doubled down. He raised the cake knife like a gavel and declared a midnight deadline. No rent, no shelter. Anyone still curious could stay for the finale. He actually used that word, finale, as though throwing out his mother were a fireworks display. A few guests slipped away, mumbling birthdays to attend elsewhere, but many stayed, hypnotized by approaching disaster. Twilight bled into night. Lanterns clicked on, insects orbited bulbs, and awkward small talk stalled around the tables. I stacked paper plates, ignoring pitying glances. At 10, Michael disappeared inside. Minutes later, he returned with my suitcase, the burgundy roller I had brought after the divorce, balanced on his shoulder. In front of everyone, he unzipped it, dumped my folded blouses onto the lawn, and asked who wanted an encore. A neighbor named Lydia gasped and moved to help, but Michael blocked her, explaining that enabling delinquency prolonged suffering. I gathered my clothes with deliberate care, brushing damp grass off each sleeve. Guests whispered that perhaps they should call someone, yet no one did. Shame can paralyze a crowd faster than fear. At 11:45, he opened the back gate and rolled my half-packed suitcase down the side path. He said the front porch made a better stage. I followed, carrying my slippers and the uneaten half of meatloaf I had baked for his lunches. Camera phones bobbed behind us like a jittery paparazzi line. Porch light glared overhead, painting my every wrinkle in theatre flood. Michael unlocked the door, stepped inside, and relatched it from the other side with a theatrical click. He spoke through the chain that Mother had 30 seconds to vacate private property. I replied that Mother still owned 2% of that property per the original down payment agreement, but he called that a sentimental myth. I told him he should double-check his paperwork. He shut the solid core door, slid the bolt, and silence swallowed the porch. Rain began, fine mist first, then heavier drops that streaked my glasses. Fairy lights behind me flickered. Neighbors retreated, embarrassed now that the entertainment had turned to cruelty. One by one, engines hummed, taillights snaked away, leaving wet asphalt and sullen puddles. Only Susan remained, standing at the window, phone pressed to the glass. Her eyes looked less triumphant than before, more intrigued by the drama's unexpected turn. I set the meatloaf beside the potted fern, straightened my spine, and faced the security camera mounted above the bell. I informed it, and by extension my son, that he had chosen the wrong grandmother to bully. My tone carried iron. The camera's red recording LED blinked like a heartbeat. I imagined Michael watching on the internal monitor, smirking at my defiance, unaware that I carried in my pocket the digital override to his precious smart lock. I lifted the suitcase handle, now heavier with rainwater, and turned toward the street. As I walked, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the cul-de-sac, and lightning flash-lit the house for one stark second. In that white glare, I saw Michael's silhouette behind the curtain, arms folded, shoulders squared, certain he had won. I kept walking, smiling because I knew Act 2 had belonged to me. Nearing the corner, I paused under a street lamp, clicked open the zipper pocket, and touched the cold metal of the override token. It pulsed faint green, ready. I whispered that keys always come back to their rightful owner. The street lamp hummed an approving chord, or so I imagined in the hush. Behind me, the porch light snapped off, final punctuation to his eviction spectacle. Ahead, rain glittered on asphalt like a runway beckoning the next scene. I wheeled my soggy suitcase forward, each rotation of plastic wheels a drumbeat of resolve, already scripting how I would flip his world inside out and make the finally mine. Rain hammered the warped tin over room 214 like an angry drummer looking for tempo. Neon from the vacancy sign pulsed through yellow curtains, washing my suitcase in sickly light while I laid documents across the motel bed the way a surgeon arranges scalpels before first cut. In one column, I placed the deed to Michael's house, still half mine because the bank had forced him to add a cosigner, back when his credit score wheezed. In a second, I lined mineral rights checks Dad had tucked away in a lockbox for 40 years, modest but mine. The third pile held proof of life my son had never bothered to learn. Nursing school certificates, a newspaper clipping about the time I pulled 2 kids from a burning Chevy, and the smart lock override token tiny as a throat lozenge, dormant until I pressed its soul button and watched it blink ready. I spoke aloud, practicing the testimony I would soon give, telling the silent room that Michael forged my eviction and that possession might be 9/10 of the law, but knowledge is the last tenth that determines winners. Ceiling plaster flaked at that. I imagined it counted as applause. I reached for the fire-safe key and twisted it into the cheap motel lockbox I had paid $5 to borrow. The combination dial stuck, probably gummed by decades of chlorine vapor, yet it surrendered on the third pull. Inside, beneath receipts for hotel soap orders, I found a thumb drive labeled in Michael's tidy handwriting, Michael LLC Tax Backup. I remembered the morning he asked me to shred a stack of outdated office files while he flexed at the gym. He must have slipped the drive into the discard box by mistake. I thanked past Michael for being arrogant enough to trust a paper shredder more than his mother. Sliding the drive into the lobby computer required bribing the clerk with the last of my lemon bars, but sugar does powerful diplomacy. The screen lit with spreadsheets, tenant rosters, wire transfers, and a folder titled Refund Queue that contained only blank templates. My pulse quickened. Elders may tire, but adrenaline writes its own prescription. A column of numbers showed monthly deposits clearing into an account called Shelter First Fund. The irony burned like cheap whiskey. Each entry matched by a withdrawal into Blue Marlin Investments, an entity I had never heard Michael mention. The motel Wi-Fi cut out mid-download, screen freezing on a line item that read, $4, $800 app fee, single mom, 2 kids, denied. The lobby lights flickered, thunder boomed, and the clerk shouted that the transformer down the block blew. Panic pricked my skin. I pictured the drive failing, evidence dissolving, my whole mission collapsing because of cheap wiring. I yanked the USB, prayed sectors hadn't corrupted, and sprinted through puddles back to room 214, where my phone could still tether. Fingers shook, yet the files copied clean. Sometimes luck loves the stubborn. I dialed Detective Rosa Delgado, my lab partner from 79, who turned financial crimes bulldog. Rosa answered with caffeine in her voice and asked why an old friend called at 2 a.m. I said I had probable cause gift-wrapped in CSV and that the perp was my own flesh and blood. She whistled low, told me to upload everything to her secure cloud, and promised she would pull warrant templates before sunrise. I explained that a raid needed interior access, and Rosa reminded me that judges dislike gamble warrants. I informed her I still controlled the electronic lock. Rosa paused, then murmured that Providence rarely arrives so neatly. She cautioned me to keep the token safe and to sleep with one eye open because cornered white-collar rats sometimes grow teeth. I added a note to Rosa, listing phone numbers of 3 tenants whose deposits Michael stole. Their testimonies could slam the cell door harder. I stuffed everything into a canvas tote, zipped it until the teeth bit shut, and slipped the override token into my bra because no purse strap rivals sternum security. Checking out, I met a weary cleaning woman who eyed my swollen tote. She mentioned that my son had called 3 times asking after an Annette. She claimed motel policy forbid revealing guests. I tipped her a mineral rights check endorsed on the back, told her to cash it and buy tires before winter. She clasped my hands, said angels carried clipboards, not harps, and warned that a silver Mercedes had circled the lot twice during the blackout. My stomach tightened. Michael owned a silver Mercedes. Rosa handed me a Kevlar vest and teased that grandmothers rarely wear such fashion, but precinct insurance insisted. I fastened it under my thrift store sweater, felt absurd, also felt invincible. We crawled toward the cul-de-sac with 2 squad cars shadowing. Dawn smeared pink over soggy shingles. My old front porch appeared exactly as I left it, fern drooping beside the rain-bloated meatloaf. Security camera eyed us, red LED blinking suspicion. I stepped onto the welcome mat that still bore a muddy imprint of my suitcase wheels. With gloved fingers, I pressed the token to the smart lock. Its light cycled from amber to green. Deadbolt disengaged with a delicate sigh, as if the house itself exhaled relief to see its rightful keeper. Inside smelled of basil candle and stale craft beer. I announced in steady voice that county detectives held a warrant and requested cooperation. Rosa echoed the legality for the body cams. Stomping upstairs, Michael appeared in silk pajamas, hair wild, phone already recording. He demanded to know why police trailed his octogenarian parent. I reminded him I was 59, not 80, and that ageism would look ugly in the transcript. He pivoted, cracked a joke about elder tantrums, but Rosa handed him the warrant. His grin drooped. Susan lingered at the banister, mascara smudged, asking if this meant she needed a lawyer. I told her Truth usually hired cheaper attorneys. Downstairs, an officer discovered a wall safe. Combo unknown, Michael smirked that they could drill till New Year's. I recited his birth date. Dial clicked first try. Inside lay cashier's checks and duplicate passports bearing aliases I did not recognize. Rosa raised an eyebrow I hadn't seen since biology class dissections. Michael lunged to slam the safe, shoving an officer. Instantly he found himself against the wall, wrists cuffed behind. He protested maternal betrayal. I replied that betrayal began the moment he charged me parental depreciation. He shouted that I had no authority. I countered that I held the key both literal and metaphorical. Squad radios crackled confirmation. Financial task force verified shell accounts. Victims en route to give statements. Susan sank onto the staircase, tears carving mascara tributaries, realization drowning denial. As officers escorted Michael past the foyer, I paused at the threshold, noting that yesterday's neon post-it, paid in full, still clung to his bedroom door where I had planted it. Raindrops from his own roof gutter tapped rhythm above us like a slow clap. Cameras flashed, badges glinted, and in that strobing moment, I understood storms are powerless against a woman who remembers her worth and wields the keys that prove it. Dawn skimmed a bruised lilac over the cul-de-sac when Rosa slid her cruiser behind the hedges. 2 black and whites idled half a block down, lights dark, engines ticking like anxious metronomes. I stepped out first. The dew soaked my sneakers, but resolve kept my socks dry, or so I told my nerves. I walked to the porch, fern still drooping beside yesterday's meatloaf, and pressed the smart lock token to the panel. Amber spun to green. The bolt released with a sigh, as if the house itself pitied the man inside. Officers poured past me, latex snapping, GoPros blinking red. Inside, basil candles masked stale craft beer. I called Michael's name once, firm, mother sharp. Upstairs, a thud, a curse, silk slippers slapping wood. He thundered down in pajamas patterned with tiny yachts, phone already live streaming. He barked, "Mom's staging a coup. Everyone witnessed this abuse." I countered, "County warrant, sweetheart. Cooperate." Rosa handed him the papers. He scanned them, color draining to sheetrock pale. Susan appeared on the landing, mascara smudged like midnight had leaked down her cheeks. She asked if cooperate meant she needed counsel. I answered that truth came cheaper than lawyers. Her shoulders sagged. Forensics fanned out. One agent detached the fiber gateway, another photographed file cabinets. Dirty. Singh opened a closet lined with bankers' boxes labeled consulting receipts. Nothing smelled like consulting. It smelled like panic. Last moment ignited in the basement. Officer Keene radioed up that he'd found a server rack hidden behind false shelving. The unit whirred louder than the furnace, cables pumping data like arterial blood. Keene warned that drives were hot. Someone had triggered a wipe command. Rosa sprinted. I followed, heart hammering. We reached the bottom stair as Michael bolted past, clutching a USB key. He shoved Keene, dove for the rack, and jammed the stick into the console. He hissed, "Try proving anything after a thermite wipe, Delgado." Rosa drew her taser. I stepped between, voice low. "Michael, thermite isn't your best color." He snarled that I'd never understand high-stakes finance. I reminded him I once balanced ER triage during a blackout and still saved lives. Higher stakes than his spreadsheets. Meanwhile, Singh yanked the power cord, severing the wipe mid-sequence. Sparks spat, room dimmed, but drives went silent, intact. Officers pinned Michael. He writhed, shouting that elderly betrayal nullified warrants. Handcuffs clasped with an iron kiss. Upstairs, Susan brought down a coffee tin. Her hands trembled so violently, beans rattled like hail. She confessed she'd stuffed it with forged cashier's checks after Michael bragged audits were for the slow-witted. She placed the tin on the piano, stepped back as though it were radioactive. Detectives discovered the wall safe next. Combo unknown, Michael smirked, claiming they'd drilled till Christmas. I recited his birthday. Dial clicked, door swung. Inside, passports in 3 aliases, a ledger marked Blue Marlin, and a velvet pouch of emerald studs Susan thought were promotional samples. Rosa photographed every page, every stone. While forensics inventoried, I wandered to the den, my former refuge. The neon post-it "paid in full" still clung to Michael's door where I'd left it. I peeled it, folded it, slipped it into my diary. Souvenirs matter. As officers led Michael out, he begged Susan to explain the misunderstanding. She stared at her phone, the live-stream chat scrolling with disbelief, unable or unwilling to draft a new narrative. He spotted me, shout-whispered that I was still his mother. I answered that mothers protect children until children become predators, then mothers protect the world. The squad car door closed on his rebuttal. Cameras flashed, my retinas peppered with white ghosts. Rosa signed chain of custody forms, nudged my elbow, said judges loved clean entries, no broken locks, no lawsuits. I teased that neat justice pairs well with morning tea. We stood beneath the eaves where rain dripped a soft cadence. I noticed the fern had perked up, fronds catching fresh light now that the storm had passed. Singh emerged with the final evidence crate and asked where to place it. I pointed to the curb beside the meatloaf container. Balance appealed to me. Proof of crime and proof of care, side by side, waiting for pickup. The house hushed, as if history pressed its finger to its lips. Rosa offered a ride to the station. I declined, wanting one last walk. I stepped off Michael's porch, this time with no suitcase, no post-its, and no doubt. The sun crested, gold poured down the street, and every yard glistened like a fresh start. Keys always returned to their rightful owners. Evidence, too. The courthouse smelled of copier toner and old oak when I stepped through security, chain of custody folder pressed like a shield against my ribs. Reporters craned over barricades, calling questions about elder abuse, white-collar rings, community outrage. I simply advanced. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered. My shoes clicked over terrazzo exactly 7 times from metal detector to elevator. An odd fact, my nerves insisted on counting. Arraignment came first. Michael shuffled in, wrists manacled, county orange draping his shoulders like a bad graduation robe. He scanned the gallery, found my face, and smirked as though stage fright could still be weaponized. I watched the bail hearing unfold. The prosecutor argued flight risk, citing 3 passports. Defense claimed community ties. I supplied a sworn statement describing the hidden server, the attempted data wipe, the shove that bruised Officer Keene. The judge, a meticulous former accountant, nodded when I explained the parental depreciation withdrawals. Bail was denied. Michael's jaw clenched so tight I heard molars grind. Pre-trial negotiations followed. Assistant DA Morrison approached the victim's bench, where I sat beside 2 single parents, a retired mechanic and a graduate student whose deposit had vanished the morning of finals. Morrison whispered that Michael's lawyer floated 8 years with parole if we agreed. She asked whether I could accept restitution spread over a decade. I shook my head. I said predatory math deserved a full equation of consequences. The victims murmured agreement. Morrison smiled grimly and returned to her desk. Jury selection lasted 2 days. I studied every face the way I once monitored EKGs. The quiet teacher who frowned at spreadsheets. The postal worker who leaned forward any time community trust was mentioned. The sous chef who reacted viscerally to the word eviction. Defense struck the sous chef. I exhaled disappointment, then refocused. 12 citizens finally filled the box, their expressions wary but attentive, an audience ready for testimony instead of spectacle. When victims spoke, the room thickened. The graduate student described sleeping in her car after the fake lease collapsed. The mechanic spoke of his disabled wife forced into a motel when deposit checks bounced. I noted how each story created another stone in the avalanche hovering above Michael's head. Defense cross-examined but stumbled. Empathy cannot be cross-extracted. Susan took the stand next, palms slick, mascara subdued. She admitted forging cashier's checks under Michael's instruction. She said he promised quick returns, said regulators were too slow, said charity began at home, and so should profit. Her voice cracked. She wiped tears. Jurors leaned in and scribbled notes. Defense tried painting her as accomplice seeking leniency. She replied she accepted guilt, but would rather face prison than keep silent. The teacher juror nodded, decisive. My turn arrived. I walked to the witness box, knees stable thanks to months of nocturnal rehearsals. I stated my name, age, occupation, retired RN. Prosecutor asked relationship to defendant. I said mother and primary victim. She asked why I unlocked my own eviction scene. I explained co-signing the mortgage, the spare key, the post-its, the rented birthday humiliation. I kept my tone clinical, letting details carry weight. Jurors held steady eye contact. One inhaled sharply when I mentioned Michael dumping my clothes onto wet grass. The prosecutor displayed the paid in full post-it, sealed in an evidence bag. I confirmed handwriting matched Michael's. Murmurs rippled. The judge tapped his gavel for order. Defense counsel rose, attempted a character assault. He suggested I resented my son's success, insinuated I plotted revenge once finances soured. I described the cardiology incident, the ambulance I could not afford, the ledger of unauthorized withdrawals labeled parental depreciation. I pointed at Michael and stated I protected him when he was powerless. Today I protected others from his power. Counsel faltered, shuffled papers, conceded. On day 3 during forensic testimony, IT specialist Rivera explained how Michael triggered a partial data wipe by USB. Retrieved logs proved intent to destroy evidence. Mid-sentence Michael stood, shouted a slur at Rivera, declared the logs fabricated. The outburst echoed. Jurors startled. Bailiffs surged. Michael tore the pen apart, shards scattering, then hurled a plastic spring toward me. It struck the railing harmlessly, but symbolism detonated, causing the judge to order the jury out and cite Michael for contempt. In the sudden hush, I felt the scale tilt irreversibly. A defendant who attacks evidence in open court signs his own verdict. Closing arguments crystallized everything. Prosecutor Morrison recapped greed disguised as entrepreneurship, cruelty marketed as fiscal discipline, a mother's key restoring balance. Defense muttered about overzealous policing, but their closing felt like a brochure for doubt no one wished to buy. Jury deliberated 90 minutes, brief enough to tell its own story. When they returned, I gripped the gallery bench, four-person rows, voice steady, verdict sheet rustling, like a page turning in a long overdue novel. Guilty on all counts: wire fraud, money laundering, elder financial abuse, obstruction of justice. I exhaled so deeply my ribs ached. Across the aisle, the graduate students silently wept relief. Even the bailiff's posture softened. Sentencing scheduled for 30 days later, but remand was immediate. As deputies prepared the chain, Michael looked at me, eyes red with something I could not read: rage, regret, or the simple shock of consequence. He mouthed that I had ruined his life. I answered aloud that he had written his own ruin. I merely read the ledger to the court. The judge's gavel cracked finality. Outside, press microphones swung my direction. I kept the statement short. Justice is a door that only opens when victims find the spare key. Cameras clicked. I turned away. Chain of custody folder tucked safe, heart light. Evening settled with lavender clouds over courthouse steps. I sat on a bench, watching streetlights blink awake, and accepted that closure is imperfect but precious. I opened my purse, unfolded the paid-in-full post-it, and let wind carry it into the dark, no longer evidence, simply litter I could afford to lose. The hallway outside courtroom 5 buzzes like a faulty fluorescent. Reporters jostle, passengers in the drama we created. I steady my breath, thumb the velvet edge of my court summons, and step inside for sentencing. Michael shuffles in under deputy escort, jumpsuit wrinkled, wrists manacled. For a flicker, he is 8 again, mud-streaked, begging me not to tell Dad he dented the mailbox. The flicker dies when he sees the gallery packed with victims. Judge Calder clears his throat. Mr. Callahan, you stand convicted of 32 counts: wire fraud, money laundering, elder abuse, each carrying statutory maximums. Does counsel wish to speak before sentence? Michael's lawyer tries to paint remorse on a canvas of excuses: economic downturn, stress, childhood scarcity. I watch the jury box, now empty yet still holding its verdict like a lingering echo, and know the paint will never dry. The judge invites victim statements. I rise. Your Honor, he did not just steal money. He stole nights of sleep, rooms of safety, faith in family. But doors swing both ways. I unlock the truth so others could step inside. My voice surprises me, steady, almost gentle. When Michael breaks protocol, lunges toward the lectern. Deputies seize him, ankle chains rattle like dropped silverware. He shouts, "Mum, stop this. Tell them I'm not a monster. Tell them you'll vouch for me." I turn, meet his frantic stare. I taught you to hold a door open, not slam it. Today I'm holding this one, on justice. His shoulders sag, rage giving way to something hollow. Judge Calder raps the gavel. 16 years in state custody, restitution of $820,000 to be disbursed immediately from seized accounts. Murmurs ripple through the courtroom. A clerk approaches me with a cashier's check, my whistleblower share by statute. I sign, hands firm. Michael's eyes flare. That's mine. No, I answer, sliding the check into my purse. Call it back rent to the world. Susan steps forward, voice small. Annette, I'm filing for annulment. If you'll testify that I cooperated. You cooperated, I say, softening. Now cooperate with yourself. Start clean. Deputies guide Michael toward the side door, the same exit he once denied me. As he passes, I fish the smart lock key from my pocket, hold it up so flashes catch the metal's wink. I kept this to remind me doors open both ways. I'm done carrying it. I set it on the evidence table. The clang sounds like punctuation. Outside, microphones bloom. I give a single line. Generosity without respect is just leverage. Remember that before you lend either. Then I walk down the marble steps into brisk daylight. Rosa waits by her cruiser. "Free woman," she greets. I show her the check. Scholarship fund for families defrauded by fake rentals. Going to call it shelter with dignity. She nods. Fitting. Wind tugs at my coat as squad lights flare, and Michael's transport van rolls away. Keys gone, debts paid. I feel lighter than the autumn leaves spiraling off the courthouse maple. Some storms you weather, others you disperse. Today, I simply turn and head home, because every door I need now opens inward. The sentencing hall pulses. Cameras flash, murmurs rise, but I walk steady, restitution check cold against my palm. Michael enters in chains. His eyes plead. I ignore the storm. Judge Calder lists crimes, wire fraud, money laundering, elder abuse, then invites last words. I stand. I remind the court he once slammed a door on me. Today I hold it open for every tenant he robbed. Michael jerks free, lunges across the rail, grabs for the check. Deputies wrestle him. Chains clatter like broken piano keys. He spits, "That's my future." I answer, "No, you're past due." Judge's gavel cracks. 16 years, $820,000 restitution. Susan whispers she will testify for the victims. I nod. Outside, reporters swarm. I say one line, "Generosity without respect is just leverage." Drop the smart lock key into a charity box and step into sunlight lighter than air. The prison van door slams on Michael. Its echo sounds exactly like the night he locked me out.